All right, friends, welcome. Great to have you all here. And yeah, really excited about this conversation. So my name is Sam Heath, and this is In the Movement. So this is a monthly webinar series that we've been doing for a while, where our goal is to engage and elevate the work of people in the movement. And by that, we mean the justice movement that's going on in this country and all kinds of places. And so our goal is to engage those people doing work, talk about what it is that they're doing, connect you all to the great work that's happening, and to let you see some of the incredible things that are going on. So I work with Equal Justice USA, and we're a national nonprofit that does work around death penalty repeal, restorative justice, and all sorts of things that relate to community safety. Our main goal is to ask the question and move people to think about what can we do in response to violence or harm instead of furthering and continuing that cycle of violence? How can we all pursue and experience a measure of healing? And so that's what we talk about here. One thing that we hold to really deeply is we talk about and think about mass incarceration, but we talk about mass incarceration as real, but also the symptom of something else that's going on. And under that, under our nation's mass incarceration response, seems to be a fear-based response to worrying about the other, to worrying about discomfort, to worrying about safety and inconvenience. And our response to that is confinement and control. And so we want to poke into that and ask questions about that and think about, especially for those of us that are Christians, the most repeated command in Scripture, which is do not fear, and how so much of our criminal legal system seems really at odds with that idea. So today what we're talking about specifically is the death penalty movement, and what does it look like to do outreach and organizing and advocacy specifically with Black and Indigenous clergy. And so our guest today is my friend, Joia Erin Thornton. So she's the founder and executive director of a group that I was going to say, but I'm going to let her give a brief intro of herself. Joia, hi, friend. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Sam. It feels good to be here. I'm so excited that you invited me and I get to share a little bit about my story and also flock story with everyone.
So Joy and I are going to talk about all sorts of things. There's some unique work that she does in a really unique way. And I've got questions about what that looks like. Joy and I overlap a lot, but I really want to probe into some of the deeper nuances of her work. So she leads a group that's called FLOCC, F-L-O-C-C, stands for Faith Leaders of Color Coalition, all in lowercase letters, and she'll explain why in just a bit. But just to put us all on the same page, or a couple things before we really dive in. One is, I see some of you doing this in the chat, and it's great. Feel free to put in the chat where you're from. If you're with a group, say hello. You can also put questions there as well. If you want to ask questions, you can also put it with the Q&A button that's there at the bottom. We'll save about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this for questions so that you can ask those towards the end. It's recorded, so we'll have this on YouTube. We'll have it on Spotify as well. And then any link or web page or resource that Joia and I mention or that we put in the chat, we'll capture all of that. And if you're here, you're registered, we'll put all that in an email and send that to you after. So don't worry about trying to capture all of those things. But to put us all on the same page, I talked a second ago about mass incarceration. I never want to assume that we all are thinking the same thing about what that means. What we mean with that phrase is that as a country, we turn to first, foremost, and often incarceration as a way to respond to violence, harm, or crime. And I say all three of those because there's some nuances of what those are and how some are not overlapping. But one way to talk about or capture mass incarceration is to think about on a global level. So the United States has about 4% of the world's population, but yet about 20% of the world's prisoners. And so we as a nation incarcerate at a rate that we really haven't seen in the present world or within human history. And it's really important to ask why we do that. Do we actually have that much crime and violence going on? Are we overcompensating? If we're incarcerating at this rate, why are we not the safest nation in the world? Because we know that we're not by about any measure of safety. So our system, the criminal legal system, holds about 2 million people, a little bit under that. The Prison Policy Initiative just released its whole piece of the pie, their annual report capturing incarceration for 2024. I'll put that in the resources when we send that to you all. They give really good graphics on it. But they're going to note a few things. They'll note that almost 2 million number, but they're also going to mention the 3.7 million individuals that are on probation or parole. We have about 5,000 jails or prisons within this country. That's not counting about 1,300 juvenile detention centers. And if we talk about something like the death penalty, that's a real good way to get a sense of the system and how it works. So 23 states plus DC within the United States have repealed the death penalty, with Virginia, where I'm at here, being the most recent. That's the first Southern or first former Confederate state to repeal. Last year, we executed, I believe it was 24 individuals. So there were 13 individuals executed federally under President Trump, which was the most in about 40 years. And this year so far, we've had 2 individuals who were executed. One was Kenny Smith by nitrogen gas, which was the first time that had ever happened, and that was in Alabama. The other was Ivan Cantu, and he was in Texas. And his execution date was the same day as another man named Thomas Creech in Idaho, whose execution was a failed execution. They were not able to complete the execution for some hard and difficult and horrific reasons. And we also want to keep in mind that the day after tomorrow, that Willie Pye is scheduled to be executed in Georgia. So there's a lot that's going on around this. And I'm sure Joia and I are going to dig into this, but I said it to a pastor this morning. I said, my best conversations with people about the death penalty get at a core thing. Pretty quickly, we can dismiss a bunch of things about the death penalty. We know it's applied in a racist way. We know it's expensive. We know it doesn't deter crime. We know it's done in a torturous manner. We know it's arbitrary. And we know that it doesn't offer healing for murder victims' family members. So once we dispel with all that, and we can talk about that too, that core thing is, what does someone think punishment does? Do we think that it can accomplish something like healing? And that's a real deep question. So we'll touch on some or all of this today. I'm really thankful that Joy is here to help us and for me to come onto her and to learn about what it looks like to organize in some really layered and important communities. So Joy, first thing, tell us about yourself. And I heard someone say this question earlier and I loved it. Where are you from and who are your people?
Right, right. That's an old Southern saying. Where are you
Yep.
from? Who are your people? Do you come from good stock? So I've
Hmm.
definitely heard that question before. But before I go into all of that, I do want to say thank you to everyone. I can't see everyone on this call, but in the words of the great poet Sean Jay-Z Carter, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with me. And for that, I am truly grateful. I see many of the Flock community people on the call. I also see members of my own family, my sister and brother-in-law, Jada and Richard Nelson. Thank you so much for being on this call. And Sam, I also want to pause and just say thank you for this platform and what you have done over the past couple of years of being just a great connector and organizer yourself. So I always like to introduce myself with the titles that warm my heart. I am a daughter. I am a sister. I am a niece. I am an auntie. At the root of my passion is being an organizer. I'm an organizer. I'm a storyteller. I am a co-leader. And I'm from Memphis, Tennessee. And I love showing what good can come from my city. I also spent a significant amount of time in New Orleans, Louisiana, and both cities shaped my love for the South. And when I say love for the South, it is glaringly complex.
Mm.
I can acknowledge the Old South and its problems, particularly its treatment of Black, Native, and Indigenous people. But I can also simultaneously acknowledge the resiliency that comes from those who challenge and disrupt and often abolish oppressive systems. So that's usually the framework that I use when I talk about the South. The South definitely has something to say, and
Mm.
I am proud of being from the South. So I graduated from Louisiana State University in Baton Rouge. I moved to New York. I moved back to study for law school. I graduated from the University of Memphis with my master's of public administration and policy. And I started working, Sam, and this will connect to you, in a charter school system
Mm.
that had recently acquired what the state of Tennessee deemed as a group of failing schools. My role was to advocate for the community and make sure that the charter heard the voice of the parent and communities and to make sure that the school remained a neighborhood school. This was challenging. I don't know how many of you watch Abbott Elementary,
It's
but
real.
Abbott Elementary, right? It is an accurate representation of how inner city schools are
Mm.
often under-resourced and underserved. And what I learned in this role is first, families who really, really try, they do not always have access to livable wages. I also learned that charters and all of its rhetoric sometimes can be very harmful.
Mm.
And I also learned that the criminal legal system almost always found a way to criminalize poverty and substance abuse in poor communities. So when I left this role, I began working with a criminal defense attorney by the name of Josh Stickler in Memphis, Tennessee, as he was building an organization called Just City. Just City was one of the only criminal justice reform organizations in West Tennessee. What I did for them as programs and partnership manager is build a court watch program. In its first year, it had over 200 trained community court watchers who would go into general sessions court and criminal court and take notes. I launched a youth participatory defense program to really put parents in the driver's seat of advocating for their child. I also was recruited, and I wonder if she's on the call, by Stacy Rector out of Nashville, Tennessee, with TADP to part-time do training with pastors and the community about Tennessee's American capital punishment system. That was a game changer for me because I was learning as
Mm.
I was educating, and I want to empower people. Sometimes it's okay to learn as you are organizing and as you are leading. I also, during the pandemic, started a coalition called Decarcerate Memphis. And Decarcerate Memphis addressed the militarization of local police departments under the Trump administration. So I was busy, busy, busy at Just City. And also in 2021, I received an incredible opportunity to come to Atlanta, Georgia, and began working on my own national model, which is why we're here to engage Black pastors in our criminal legal system with the death penalty. And I worked on this model for 2 years before we launched in August 2023 as a standalone organization with the help of many people. And so I'm excited
Hmm.
that I get to lead this organization, that I founded this organization, and really, really hope and pray that this exists beyond me.
Hmm. Joya, I love that a lot of this came out of education and the proximity to students and seeing what's there. And I mean, and you know this because I feel that's how, I taught for 10 years and
Right.
landed here. And there's such, unfortunately, there's such parallels between our education system and the criminal legal system and how those are engaged and managed and handled and how harm is responded to. And yeah, it pointed me to a more baseline issue. I used to tell
Right.
people, I think like the baseline place in this country is engaging the education system. But under that, something's driving what that looks like. And kind of
Mm-hmm.
similar with our criminal legal system. Under it, something is driving it and seeing some of those motivations and how can we shape those things. Also
Right.
love that you talked about the South and
Yeah.
unashamedly, like there's a love there for the South. There's a complexity to the South. I grew up in North Carolina and there's all the things there. But
It
our
is.
mutual friend, Jamar Tisby, I love hearing him recently say
Yeah, let's
that
more.
there are Souths and that it also helps of naming and where it is and what those nuances are of where exactly what portion and part of the South, because there are differences with what that looks like.
Right. Right. So interesting. And
Oh, I love it.
it's very complex. So you have to have some type of framework when you talk about the South, because the South at times has been harmful, but there is resiliency there.
Absolutely. So you shared kind of how Flock came out, but what was the decision like, and how and why did you see a need for this to be what you do full time, like engaging this work rather than just in addition to other things or a project under another org? Why did this need to be standalone?
Right. So Block began in June 2021. We're about to have our third birthday. I gathered a group of faith leaders, policy professionals, advocates, attorneys, and organizers together on a Zoom call to really leverage policy power in the faith sector. There were about 21 people on the call. I see Dr. Cassandra Jones, Reverend Jack, and I know it's some others. You know, you always get in trouble when you call names, but I saw those two. And Flock began with a vision that I brought to others in the movement who helped me shape, fund, and grow this idea into a force to be reckoned with. So Flock builds on the social and human justice rights movements that were led by Black clergy in particular. I want to be very, very poignant and bold in naming that. We are no stranger to the work of King and Abernathy and Shuttlesworth. These named and those unnamed were very critical to passing the Voting Rights Act and desegregation and even policy post the 1960s. That same fire, that same vision, and that same passion still exists today in many pastors and many clergy. You know, when I go to speak to groups or even when I have one-on-ones, I'm looking for the unnamed versus the name. People have often suggested names to me, and I'm like, I don't know, this person may or may not make the work about something that is completely different. But that is not to say that we don't have notable clergy that are engaged in flock. We do, but they understand that the work is at center. The work is the star, and the work will remain the focus until we are liberated.
I'm reading the newest biography on King that came out, I think it was last year. And one thing that it's already balancing really well is talking about the movement in the 50s and 60s as the movement. Like, it was not just Martin King. There were so many others, to
Right.
your point, named and unnamed, that were part of, and they were consciously part of this group doing this thing. And it was there were certainly individuals who came in and harnessed parts of that, but it was this kind of entity far beyond any single individual or any single group.
And I also want to make that rally cry as well. You know, I have pastors that come to me and they say, I only have 40 members. You know, that's okay. We all have a role to play in liberation movements and movements dedicated to social and human rights. You may have 40 members, but you may have a powerful voice. You may be a great writer. You can have 4,000 members and we can use you. So I always want to kind of put that out there for those who are listening and who are interested in flock, that it does not matter if you are named or unnamed when it comes to the sector, the greater stage of faith leaders.
So these are two separate questions, but they kind of go together. Why Black faith leaders and why the death penalty?
Right. So as I just mentioned earlier, Black faith leaders already have made marks and strides and inroads when it comes to national, local, and state policy. What I wanted to do is place these pastors, just like I did with the parents when I was in the school system, into the driver's seat. Every year around, you know, in an election year, you have politicians that are eagerly like rushing to come to churches and talk about their platform. What I wanted to do was embolden pastors that do not understand, because some of them do, and they use that power and they're engaged with flock as well, that you can develop your own legislative agenda. You can tell the politicians what you want. You can have conversations with them, you can meet with them and let them know what you will and what you will not stand for. When you talk about the death penalty, I definitely believe that the death penalty is at top of the things that we talk about in our criminal justice reform. If we don't address our relationship with death, we cannot address anything else. And as I always say when I'm meeting with individuals, the death penalty is kind of a hard sell.
Yeah.
Because until it comes knocking on your door, you're just not connected to it. So when I have conversations with pastors, I definitely respect them. At times, I allow them to blow off steam and allow our relationship. And I think this is something that you said, Sam, to grow and move at the speed of trust, sending them information and articles, introducing them to cases, real people. So you
Hmm.
have this one side of the system where it's statistics, where we know about racial bias and victims and people who, individuals who kill white people versus individuals who kill non-white people. So those are like the facts that are there, but also the cases of the individuals and the families that pastors can connect to and talk with
Hmm.
face to face. So for me, I fell into this work not so much as a skeptic, but as also a person who had a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't I allow pastors to do that same thing to me? Because they have a greater responsibility in leading congregations and lay people not only to salvation, but to their own moral questioning and compass.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talk about people often when Jesus was reading from the prophet Isaiah and was saying he came to set the captives free. And I say
Yes,
there's a spiritual sense of that, and there is a literal sense of that, of release from what bondage looks like here on earth. And I also don't know if you get this with other people, but often when I talk with people about the death penalty, the conversations often end with them saying, "Wow, that's the longest conversation I've ever had about the death penalty."
right.
And I think the death penalty goes unthought of
Yeah,
mostly in most places until someone's pressed to think about it. What do you think it does? What is it that you want it to do? For the most part, we just accept whatever it is that we're around. We're enculturated with it. And that makes sense until someone's kind of pushed. It's not one of those issues that rises to the fore often. We
right.
just kind of, I think you were saying earlier, like we almost take it for granted.
Right, right. And one of my board members, Pastor Daryl Gray in Missouri, he talks about that very verse of setting the captives free. So we have to, when we apply scripture to the things that we believe. I remember a lot of churches were buying up the theater when Just Mercy came out, the movie with
Hmm.
Brian Stevenson based on his book with Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan. And, everybody was filling up the seats of Just Mercy. And it's like, it kind of died down. It's like, just mercy, dot, dot, dot. Now what? I wish
Right.
that conversation had been had.
Right. And there's so much. There's so much. The awareness is key, but always that push towards action.
Right.
So we're in March, we're in Women's History Month, and I want to ask about this work for you as a woman. What, as a woman doing this deep work that you do, what about it makes it particularly hard or particularly smoother? Like how is that a help and sometimes something that maybe hinders things?
It is Women's History Month for a couple of more days. And I love talking about the women who've come before me. I stand on the shoulders so many great women. And in settings like this, I want to call their names. So I want to call Sojourner Truth,
Hmm.
Diane Nash, Ida B. Wells, Donna Brazile, Septima Clark. Many people who know me understand how very important it is for me to honor the work of those who came before me and for me to always be cognizant that I am building, not creating. Women have fought so hard in this country and world to have agency, respect, and visibility. Black in particular, as a double minority, fight twice as hard. Even during the women's suffrage movement, I remember reading that there were women like Mary Church Terrell, who was also from Memphis, often talked about the duality of
Hmm.
being Black and being a woman, and how the women's suffrage movement of the late 1800s did not address Black women. She details this explicitly in a speech called The Progress of Colored Women. I read and I study those texts and find that some progress has been made, but we still have a long way to go when you talk about wages and visibility, ability, and respect. For me, being a Black woman, and Mary Church Terrell, she was a woman of mixed race who identified as Black. There were certain situations where she was welcome, acknowledging her privilege as well. But there were also situations where she wasn't welcome by Susan B. Anthony and others.
Hmm.
So she really
Hmm.
had to fight to show that there's a difference in being a Black woman. And I time have to have those same conversations as well. I always go back to when I was in Memphis, I was speaking at this church or about to speak at this church. And because I didn't have on a skirt,
Mm, watch
the
out.
pastor told me that I had to speak from the congregation. I could not speak from the podium. And I definitely could speak from the pulpit. If we have any Baptists, Black Baptists on this call, you can feel my pain. So there are some things that I fight against, but for me, I am such a proponent of sitting on the balcony and seeing the bigger picture of things. So small discomforts like that, things that I still have to cut and fight through, that's just a temporary inconvenience to the larger picture of the abolishment of this system.
What does that work look like then, engaging those within flock?
Right. So as I said before, we have pastors that are at all different levels. I engage pastors who are already doing the work and they're like, hey, I'll write an op-ed. I saw that case. I'll write it tomorrow. And I'm like, thank you so much. And then I have others that are like, I don't know, Joia. I don't know, Miss Thornton. We're going to have some more conversations about this because if it was my daughter, and I totally understand that. So what
Hmm.
I like to do is, of course, a student of the civil rights movement is get to know people and find out their strengths, but also push people to
Yeah.
where I see them growing
Yeah.
within the movement. There are people that came to me and said, I like you as a person, but I'm never going to be on this train to abolish the death penalty. Right?
Yeah,
So
that's at least
now,
honest.
right. And now some of those people are my biggest
Mm,
cheerleaders, biggest proponents. What can I share? What can I sign?
hmm.
So that just kind of goes into the relationship building. Flock has organizations and organizations involved within the community and also individuals involved in the community, different talents, different walks of life. We're in, I believe now, about 15 to 20 states. Go on Flock Justice, pull up our toolkit to see where those states are. We
It's
still
a
need
good
more
toolkit.
states. Yes. Even if your state is not a state that imposes the death penalty, you still can get involved on a federal
Hmm.
level.
Hmm. Joya, I know your work and we overlap enough to and where I know this is a hard question because people ask me and I'm like, give me an exact date, but what does a typical day at work look like for you? Or maybe like in a week, kind of what are the rhythms of what things look like for your day to day?
Hmm. All over the place.
Yeah, yeah, I
All
know.
over the place. But thankfully, I am a great manager of my own time.
Hmm.
I collaborate with a lot of different groups in various states and various time zones. I
That's hard.
prioritize, yeah, you know what I'm
Mm,
talking about, Sam. I prioritize the big things first. So during session, of course, bills that are up for vote, for hearing, executions with upcoming dates, executions with pending dates, the development of Flock as I'm still growing, Flock out. I still try to have at least 2 to 3 one-on-ones with pastors. I just had one earlier with a pastor in Philadelphia who have questions and that are interested in joining the Flock community. So
hmm.
my day can begin around 8 a.m. and end about 7 p.m. But again, I'm always prioritizing, always thinking about our state leaders who are on this
Hmm.
call and figuring out ways how I can join them and amplify the work that they are already doing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I hear that. I also know there's a national piece to your work. There's an organizing piece. There's the regular meetings of flock. There's also really down in the weeds work, sometimes state specific, sometimes really case specific. So before we get into some of those things, to back up and talk about the death penalty as a whole, what are some particular pieces of the death penalty that really trouble you in a good way, that motivate you to engage this work, that hopefully that righteous anger piece, kind of what
Mm.
brings that up for you? And are those different now than what they used to be? Because as you talked about, like we're always learning in this, because there's always things being written and people that we're meeting and things are changing, but kind of how you felt about the death penalty and what that brought up for you, kind of where is that now versus in your past?
Righteous rage. I love that, Sam. the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, we had a symposium called Journey to Justice. And there was a quote that I said that this is more than anger. This is ancestral rage. This is generational rage. So what I bring into this space is different, and others that are Black and Indigenous is a little bit different than others because we feel the pain of racial terror violence and how it's still being perpetuated in several systems. So many things, Sam, trouble me about the American capital punishment system, not just one. Of course, many people know I was and I'm still active in the Free Purvis Pain movement in Tennessee, and how intellectual disabilities and racial bias played an outsized role in his treatment and ultimately his sentencing. But this system that we deem as just, as of February 2024, has more than 100, 196, 197 exonerations. This means that 100 and over 196 times there have been cases where new evidence of innocence has been sufficient. What if we executed those individuals, right? We have
Right. Those are just the ones we know about, those
we
197.
have executed innocent people.
Yeah.
And as citizens of a free and civilized country, I just can't sit with that. I can't sit with that. So you have innocence, you have inadequate counsel, you have racial bias, you have costs, which Demetrius Minor, the national manager of Conservative Concern, and we talk about a lot. And also something for me more recently, Sam, and I don't know if you've been paying attention to it as well. I think you have. Youth and brain development is something that I'm starting to pay attention to a little bit more. We sentence people to death at 18, at teenagers, when there is science to show that a person's brain is not fully developed until about 23 or 25. All of these issues trouble me.
Yeah.
And I'm dedicated. I'm very dedicated personally and also professionally to adding more amplification to these areas that make the death penalty very cruel and inhumane.
I'm corresponding with a man in a prison in Virginia here, and he was 19 when he was involved in a crime, and it resulted in a flesh wound from a gun, and he was sentenced to 45 years in prison, and he's 20 years in. And just as soon as you're talking about brain development, which every time I hear that we're developing into our early 20s, it's still a surprise. Like it is wild to consider. I think of myself now just in my back when I was in my early 30s, how differently I thought about things and what I would or wouldn't do, much less at that time. And it's major. That doesn't excuse what happens, but it explains so much around it. And it's got to be something that's considered and weighed. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Oh, yeah.
Now, what about for you as a Christian? What in this work is more poignant, whether it's more poignant from that aspect of ancestral rage or more poignant of this is exciting and important, but kind of where are those pieces that particularly bring you in as a Christian?
Well, Sam, you know I am a child of the King. I make no apologies for that. In fact, I know my faith is the secret sauce to my success, my wins, and our work. And like many people that are faith people and even biblical examples, there is always turbulence in well-doing. And I have faced many struggles to reach this point. One of my favorite scriptures is Galatians 2:20. And it says, I am crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. And the life that I now live is by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. What that simply means is I signed up for this. All of the things that God endured are the things that I will endure to uplift him, to bring attention to him, his life, his core values, his mission. I am his daughter. And just like sometimes with family members are like, oh yeah, we knew they were a Jones. You tend to be treated like how people think of your family. The thought of, my savior a certain way. So I'm going to have to go through some of those same things. But in the end, we know the end as Christians, who gets that glory and who is the ultimate winner. So I'm fighting, and
Mm.
I'm running that race because I know
Mm.
what happens in the end. And it's not given to the swift. It's not given to the strong. It's given to
Hmm.
the person that's going to endure. Now let me be quiet because I am the daughter of a pastor. So
No, I love it. I love especially the phrase of that you signed up for this. And that's real. And there's such a, again, I use that word poignant, which I think is fitting for this as Christians. So my wife's grandfather is in his last days. He's
mm,
likely dying any moment and made it several days past what we expected.
I'm
And we've been
sending
talking
prayers
with
for
our
you,
kids.
Sam.
Thank you. We've been talking with our kids, they're 8, 6, and 5, about this and praying for him at night and just trying to process death with them, which this will be the first person that close to them that they'll know who have died. And we've tried to really pair together, like, this is sad. This is a result of sin. And there's joy here. Like, his
Yeah.
suffering will end. We know, as Paul says, to be absent from the body is to be present
Mm,
with the Lord. And we've talked about his wife. Like, we've tried to pray both that she will grieve well, because that's good.
mm,
This morning I said to my kids, Jesus cried about Lazarus, but
yeah.
also that we'll find hope. And there's so much of that in this work for the death penalty, right? Like, there it is filled with so much weight and darkness and intensity. And yet there is beauty and hope. Like, these are image bearers that we're dealing with all of the
Right.
time and that we're engaging. These are not just cases or campaigns. These are
Mm,
individuals. And it's so important to hold on to that. And so now, kind of getting into the weeds of one thing, you talked about Purvis Payne, but can you talk a little bit about Tremaine Wood? And that's going to be a deep focus for us on next
yeah.
month in the movement. We'll say more, but who is he and how does he relate to this work that you're doing?
Right. Amanda is definitely the best person to outline Tremaine Wood, but Tremaine Wood is a man of mixed race who identifies as a Black man on Oklahoma's death row, who was sentenced to death for his role in a robbery that left a man unalived. Tremaine was about 22 when this happened. But there's no dispute. Tremaine did not kill the victim, Mr. Ronnie, but and still for his role, Tremaine was sentenced to death by a majority white jury. I think it was only one Black juror, and racial bias was present throughout his entire case. His lawyer also said in a sworn statement that he was not coherent enough to even represent Tremaine as he was dealing with his own alcohol abuse issues. One of Tremaine's lawyers, and of course Amanda, who approached me, she engaged me last year and asked me for my support and strategy around bringing Tremaine home. I've been working with the team for about 8 months, and now I am confident that Tremaine's case is one that those in power will take a closer look at before they make the decision to end Tremaine's life. So we are still on the battlefield for Tremaine.
Mhm.
Thank you for asking about that case.
Yeah, there's so much in Oklahoma, right? There's so much up and down that's happening right there with individuals that are on death row. I mean, it was just about 2 years ago that there were 25 executions scheduled out over 2 years every 30 days. And now things are really different in Oklahoma. There's a bill that's potentially going to bring a moratorium for 2 years, but yet Oklahoma has such a complicated and weighty history, and Tremaine's an example of that. I mean, and when we think about Julius Jones, right? four
Yeah,
hours
yeah,
before he was going to be executed, he was saved, but saved in quotes because he's still there over 20 years off death row, but still in prison. So there's some particularities of Oklahoma that are still happening right now and playing out in real time.
right. And shouts out to Antoinette Jones and Mama Jones and Cece and those on the ground who really fought for
Hmm.
that to happen.
Hmm.
It's not over,
Yeah.
but I do believe that we unhardened the hearts of a lot of the
Yeah,
folks in
it's begun.
Oklahoma.
So
Mhm.
much. Yeah, yeah. I see Reverend T. Cherie's here too. There's so
Yes,
many.
Reverend T. Cherie.
Yeah, there's so many that have played a role within all of this. All right. So, Joya, what does it look like, or what would you like it to look like for Christians to start engaging in this work? I mean, you said even if someone's not in a death penalty state, there's still a role. So,
Oh
what is
yeah.
it that you think or want Christians to be able to do here?
First, Christians can educate themselves. My mom has a saying, and all that getting, get an education, get an understanding. They can educate themselves about the laws surrounding the imposition of the death penalty and death sentences in their state. You need to know what's going on a local level.
Mm.
If you're not a state that imposes the death penalty, get to know about what's going on the federal level. We can help you with that. Christians can use their voices to urge lawmakers that they do not want the state to kill in their name.
Mm-hmm.
Christians can join local organizations addressing these issues like TADP, GFADP, so many other organizations. And finally, Christians can implore all of the tenets of their faith while doing their own social soul searching.
Mm-hmm.
They can apply that to abolition. They can apply grace and mercy and love and redemption and salvation and understand that the death penalty does not deter crime.
Mm-hmm.
You know, oftentimes when people are committing or involved in those crimes, they don't think about, my state has the death penalty, so I may not do this.
Right.
This
Right.
is a
Right.
large,
No one thinks that. Yeah.
right. This is a larger issue
Yeah.
that we're dealing with it, and it's so many antecedents that lead a person to ultimately being sentenced to death.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this earlier, and I'm going to put it in the chat, but talk some more about the toolkit and how that's maybe a helpful, really practical next step for folks to take a look at and see what to do and how to move into this work.
So right now, and I'm looking at my phone, I want everybody to go to flockjustice.org. On that first page, you'll see that there is a toolkit. The toolkit is really Flock's DNA, and it talks about the core values of Flock, where Flock is located in various states, all of our wonderful partners that are on this call that are strengthening Flock and that have referred people, rock star pastors to me to be able to strengthen the work that is already going on. The toolkit is just a great map of what's going on at Flock and what is to come. It talks about resistance in the Black church, all the way from slave rebellions to the 2020 uprisings, to why we need folks to participate, contribute, and support us in the abolition of the death penalty. So I don't want to give it all away, but I definitely want folks
Go to the
to.
link.
I think I did, but I don't want to give it all away because we're always looking for more and more partners and also more states to join us in the movement.
Yeah. I say to people often, Joia, that because and I heard Ta-Nehisi Coates say this once, and I thought, oh, it's brilliant, that my job is not to convince, to debate, to argue. Like my goal is to describe and invite.
Right.
There is a problem that is here, and blessedly, there's a solution that is here. There are alternatives, there are ways of pursuing healing, and that's so much of what our work is. That it's
Right.
bringing someone in and creating a space to really hold a conversation and just reflect on something. And I know that's
Right.
so much of what your work is calling people to just consider
Consider.
what does this mean or what might this entail rather than a debate, which I'm very much not interested in because those are intense, but
Yeah.
just to think through something and to consider each other's perspective.
Right.
Mm.
Right. Right.
There was one question that came in, and I'll also say anybody who has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A box at the bottom. But one that came in a second ago, Joy, was someone said, what were some of your first prayers for Flock? And they said they were wondering what you had prayed for and what was happening with your spiritual eyes from the beginning of this.
I think with any, and I love that question, by the way. Thank you
Mm.
so much for that question. I need to pray more, and I'm asking folks
Don't
to
we
pray
all?
for Flock.
Yeah.
For Flock, we'll pray for Flock more. One of the first prayers was to guard Flock, was for for God to have a banner around Flock, because whenever you start something new, and this is for anyone who's listening, whenever you start something new, there's always going to be someone or some things or some powers that are trying to tear you down and trying to negate the fact that, do I really want to do this? Should I do this? If there is a vision that has been placed in your spirit, in your soul, in your heart,
Mm.
you definitely need to pray for protection. That was the first thing. The
Mhm.
second thing is to send people who were of the same mind. Send people who carry my same heart. Send people around me who wanted to see flocc grow just as much as I wanted to see flocc grow.
Mm-hmm.
Number three was to remove me out. So when we talk about the branding of flocc and the lowercase letters, one of my favorite feminist writers is Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks, she lowercased her name because she wanted folks to focus on the larger issue of equality for women. So I wanted to lowercase the letters in a flocc and the acronym of flocc so that the work will always be at center. What are we trying to do? Abolish the death penalty.
Mm-hmm.
Flocc is doing it, but what are we doing? Abolishing the death penalty. So it's more about that than it is about Joia, than it is about flocc, than it is about the pastors that we engage in flocc. So those are some of my strongest prayers. And finally, for flocc to exist beyond me, I want flocc to begin to address, as we abolish the death penalty, begin to address other systems that we should abolish, whether it be techno-racism, different fights within our educational system. So I want flocc to exist. I hope I am not flocc's only first and last national director.
Yeah. I mean, and even the name of flock or FLOCK, a flock of birds, it's so communal, right?
Yes.
No one piece or no one individual overtakes all of it. That is
Co-leadership.
this mass that's moving. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what does it look like to follow you and your work? We've got the webpage there in the chat. We'll make sure to send that out. But other ways or other spaces that you want people to keep up with you and your work?
Great. You can follow me on Twitter, Joia in ATL. You can follow me on Instagram at Joia in ATL. I'm in Atlanta, for those of you who know, but I'm always posting things and facts, and I'm sharing information from the other orgs that we collaborate with. That's what it looks like to follow me, to really understand that I'm here to co-lead, to collaborate, and work with others in the movement. So I encourage you to follow me there. Also, floccjustice.org. If you sign up for our mailing list, you will be able to have front row knowledge of everything that we're doing. Anytime that we gather, if you are a Black Indigenous pastor, I really want to get a chance to meet folks as much as I can. I can hear Laura Porter saying, "You're just one person." But as much as I can, I really want to engage and talk to the folks who are interested in flocc.
Yeah, great. I'm going to put another question that came in. It came in the Q&A, but I'll put it here in the chat so you can see it. It says, what can we as organizers and advocates do to bring community safety, death penalty abolition, and other criminal legal reform movements together to be more aligned and unified? Because there are a lot of silos, right?
Right. No, we have to find those intersections. You know, there's an intersection when it comes to poverty and bail reform and poverty in the death penalty and poverty in education, intellectual disabilities, like their race. We have to find those intersections. And that's the umbrella that we come out of. We need to stop working as organizations and we need to start working as an organism, right? We need to make sure that we understand because of those intersections, that's where we can connect, and that's where there's connectivity. So that's my biggest thing. I always talk about invite me to any panel and I can relate it back to the American capital punishment system.
Absolutely. I mean, we were saying earlier, like it's such a root for so many things that we do and that we are as a nation. Even if we have not been in the criminal legal system or know someone, one, you for sure do in your life. You just might not know it. But if we don't know that directly, there's some connection. We're all touched by this system, this view, and this philosophy of punishment, and it manifests itself everywhere. And I was saying to someone recently, you know, my hope is not just to end the idea of incarceration, but I want to end that way that we bring violence in all spaces, whether that's in education, whether that's in the civic sphere, the criminal legal system, within medical care, all of those spaces, because there's so many ways that it manifests itself. To your point, it all intersects, very much so.
It does. It does. Just got to find them. Just got to find them.
Absolutely. So let me end with this, and then we'll talk about the upcoming webinar next month, especially how that connects with the other case that you're engaging. But what is one way that you find hope in all of this? Because it is, as I said before, really weighty and hard work, and there's often more kind of quote unquote losses in this death penalty world, it feels, than really clear wins. But if we're speaking of individuals, like I see people all the time thinking and reflecting, but if you look at the system as a whole, there's a lot that's there. Kind of where do you find hope within all of this?
Biblically, Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down. That's something that I always think about. And also, the death penalty in Furman versus Georgia was considered and was abolished before. There
Hmm.
was a pause on executions before. We can still get to that point. And then, of course, other cases like Gregg versus Georgia, people started to slowly kind of bring the death penalty back in their states. But my hope is that we've done it before. The
Hmm.
more we shine light upon it, and that's another Ida B. Wells quote, the best way to end injustice is to shine a light upon it, shine truth upon it. So that's what I think gives me the most hope is that
Yeah.
we've done it before in the 70s.
Yeah.
We can do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about James Baldwin and him saying, his goal was to be a witness, and that
Yes.
there's still great hope in that work, in being a witness to these things and calling people to change and to shift their gaze and to see the world for what it really is. Because
Oh,
we
yes.
might not just stumble upon people on the side of the road like the Good Samaritan did. We may need to go out of
Mm,
our way to find those individuals. And that's really key. Hmm.
right. Right.
All right, I'm going to point to a couple things as we talk about kind of next steps here. I'll put in the chat. So the Evangelical Network is the branch of EJUSA that engages Christians about this work and calls them to move from awareness into action. Follow us on Facebook. You can go there. And then I'm going to talk also about next month's In the Movement webinar. So I'll put in the chat when it is, and then I'll put the registration link, and you can go ahead and register. But we referenced it before. So I'm going to talk with Amanda Bass, who is Tremaine Wood's attorney. And she's going to talk about Tremaine Wood and who he is, his case, what's happening with him within Oklahoma, ways that individuals can engage. And we're going to do a deep dive into a case study and looking at this individual. It's the first time that we've had an attorney come on to dig into the specifics of a case for an individual. And I want you to hear about Tremaine Wood. We're going to do that on April 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Come and hear about that. It's a great follow-up to this conversation as Joy talks about that national engagement. Now let's see what it looks like on the ground level with an individual that Joy and I both are engaging and coming around, and see how we can rally others to engage his story in his case. And then last thing I'll share is this. So CCDA, the Christian Community Development Association, is having a book discussion with Danielle Surratt. And Danielle also recently came on in the movement. And she's the executive director of Calming Justice, which is a restorative justice group that's based in New York City. And she does work all over the country around what does it look like to pursue repair rather than punishment. Her book, Until We Reckon, is a book that came out a few years ago, and in a lot of ways is the book to engage on indicting the system and giving a way forward. Most books do one or the other. Hers does both in really beautiful ways. And so we're going to talk with her at the end of this month, March 27th, from 2 to 3. And so if you want to engage as much of that book as you can, or all of it, then come to that space. She's going to answer some questions about a lot of these things that Joya and I do. I quote her often and talk about and look at her work because a lot of it's really research driven. So consider coming to that. I put the registration link down there. There's a Facebook group for it as well. If you're a fast reader or excited about the questions, there's the reading guide for it. But I want you all to see there's a lot of people talking about these things and calling people to action. And maybe that's the refrain that Joy and I really want to land on, is that awareness is key. Educate yourself and grow, and always be thinking, what is that next step toward action that I can take? So I'm going to make sure to send you all of these links, all of these things that Joya said. Joy, I don't even know if I follow you on Instagram, but I need to. So I wrote it down. I'm going to double check and make sure that we do, and we'll send that out to everybody. But Joy, you said you got to pray more. So here, we'll start here. Can I pray for you? And then
Please
we'll
do.
close out and head out. Okay.
Thank you.
Father, thank you for the gift of this time for my friend Joya and the many roles that she fulfills. I pray that you would sustain her in this work and that you would continue to bring her to a space of a humble perspective of this work is beyond her and beyond Flock and connects with so many others in the past, in the present, and in the future. And we pray that in this world and in this country that you would bring peace, that you would bring an end to the system of punishment and death and sadness, and that you would bring your healing and make us agents of that. And may we do that in kindness and grace and with all of the delicate nuance that it requires. As we head out into our day to day, we pray that you would bless and guide us to love you and to love others. Amen. All right, my friend, thank you for coming. Blessings on your work. I know we're talking soon. I so enjoy working with and beside you and just seeing things grow and change and learning from you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I saw everybody's comment. I just couldn't respond, but thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.